What's up, hockey fans? We are coming at you live from the, inaugural edition of the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. We are brought to you by Sticks.com. I'm your host, Emma Lingen. I am joined by a very familiar face on this Saturday evening. My normal co-host at the Wraparound, Michael Agello. We're usually talking to you all on Mondays and Thursdays. Now we are coming at you live to talk about the playoffs. So we're going to get right into it. The Winnipeg Jets beat the St. Louis Blues by a final score of 5-3 in game one on Saturday in Winnipeg. And before we get into all the info about that game and the other games going on right now, do want to remind you we are brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head there now and gear up. All right, Michael. It was an interesting game, right? I feel like this is one that I always figured this was a series I figured would go the distance. And this game almost went the distance. We were saying we were worried about overtime. Of course, it ended up being 5-3 final. Shaky start for both goaltenders, though. You know, Bennington for St. Louis had 2 goals on his first 7 shots. Hellebuck, 3 goals on his first 10 shots that he faced. When goaltending has been, a big strength for both of these teams heading into these series, in your opinion, which team do you think needs their goaltender to step up the most in game 2?
Good evening, Emma. I'll just say playoffs. I'm in Buffalo. Those don't go together. So,
I'm in Nashville, so we don't have those here this year either. So I'm right there with you.
At least they made it last year. I think goaltending is more important for Winnipeg. Not because Winnipeg isn't a very good defensive club. They are. But I think the sort of specter of Hellebuck and his, I shouldn't say inability, but I think he has set himself a standard of excellence in the regular season. And now he's got to follow that up with equal excellence in the postseason. And game 1, he got off, as you said, to a very shaky start. I think he ended up with 3 goals and 17 shots. He made a big save late in the second period on Jordan Kyrou, but he wasn't sharp. I don't know if his nerves. I know that Wayne Gretzky on the TNT broadcast said something to the effect of he's playing deep in his crease, deeper than Hellebuck usually plays. That might be a sign of him being a little tired. That I think somebody on the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast also said that. And he played 63 games. He played a ton of games, and that is always a concern. That's why a lot of teams will play their goalies, even their starters, like 50 to 55 games. 63 is a load. So we will have to track that throughout the rest of the series to see how he plays.
Well, you mentioned obviously the concern about how much Hellebuck is used during the regular season, and not just this year. I mean, that's been a consistent thing for him with Winnipeg. At the same time, though, he has set such a high standard for himself. Even though he has not won the elusive Stanley Cup yet, he has still set this incredibly high standard for himself as one of the best goaltenders in the league. So are there concerns that you think, maybe that he can't live up to those high standards in the playoffs, and that maybe he's peaked and playoffs just aren't going to be something that he can accomplish?
Well, I refer to it as Four Nations Connor, because from the Team USA and the American perspective, this guy who played superhuman during the regular season, who is definitely going to win the Vezina and has a very good chance of winning the Hart for the first time since Jose Theodore won it over 20 years ago. He has to, I think, equal that level of performance. And if he doesn't, then people are going to start saying to him as a single player, as people say about the Toronto Maple Leafs as a team, that when the time comes, he's falling short. Now, he played okay at the Four Nations, but he got out goaltended by the guy he beat, or at least his team beat tonight, Jordan Binnington. He has got to win the goaltending battle. If Binnington stands on his head, then St. Louis has got a puncher's chance at winning this series.
Well, that is, a lot of this is going to come down to goaltending, I think. Another thing, that I want to add in here is the coaching in for both of these teams, because, Scott Arniel and Jim Montgomery, some of the best in the league. Montgomery has come into St. Louis and made them look like the record-setting Boston Bruins from a couple years ago. So the impact there has obviously been huge. How much of this series do you think is going to come down to the coaching element? Certainly it's going to play a role, but how much of a role do you think it's going to play? And who would you give the edge to in that category?
Well, Arniel has been an NHL head coach previous to this. He served as an assistant under Rick Bowness. Montgomery has been in Dallas, has been in St. Louis, has been in Boston. He's had success. Simply by experience, you would think you would give it to Montgomery, and that ridiculous season that the Bruins had a few years ago was spoiled by the Bruins struggling and then losing in Game 7 to Florida. But he's an excellent coach, and it wasn't a coincidence that he got snatched up by St. Louis, who fired their existing coach as soon as Montgomery hit the market. I would give the coaching tactical version and favor to Montgomery, but I think the team that's better, obviously, is the team that won the President's Trophy this year.
Well, obviously, one of the many storylines going on in this series, of course, the Battle of the Schenn brothers. So Game 1 goes to Luke with the Winnipeg Jets. He did pick up an assist on Jared Anderson-Dolan's goal in the first period. I can attest to the fact that Luke Schenn, not really known for putting up a lot of points. That's okay. That's not his job. But he was here in Nashville for quite a bit, covered him for a couple of years. Braden is typically known for being the scorer or the point getter out of the two, and he was left off the score sheet in Game 1. So looking at in the many ways that guys can have an impact on a game, whether it's by, on the score sheet or not, which of these two brothers do you think is going to have the bigger impact for his team in this series?
Well, Braden tried to get on the sheet under the penalty category by almost taking Neil Pionk's head off late in the third period. I think they figured this game is over with. So let's take a chunk out of the opposition. If St. Louis has a chance, Braden Schenn has to score. He has to be a contributor. He was a contributor for St. Louis when they won the Cup in 2019. He was a key performer for them. There wasn't a coincidence that a lot of playoff teams, including Vegas, including apparently Florida, and we know Toronto, were interested in trading for him at the deadline. And apparently he let Doug Armstrong know that he didn't want to go anywhere. So they made this not improbable run, but they were not exactly in a favorable playoff position until they got red hot right around the deadline. And we know Luke Schenn. We both know Luke Schenn. Luke Schenn was drafted by the Leafs. He played for the Leafs a couple years ago when they finally won a playoff round. He was a key contributor for the Leafs in that series. He played on the top pairing with Morgan Riley. He was a physical presence. He pushed back against the Tampa Bay Lightning, who he played for and won a couple Stanley Cups with. He will be a contributor for Winnipeg, but I would say that Braden Schenn will be a bigger contributor, and if he's not, then St. Louis may go out of this series pretty quickly.
Well, Winnipeg had, for the most part, I would say, had a relatively quiet evening offensively. Just their star players were not stepping up as much as maybe you would hope to see in the absence of guys like Nikolai Ehlers, who we'll get to later. But relatively quiet evening for them. But then the big guns came alive for the Jets in the third period. Of course, Kyle Connor, their leading scorer, scored the game winner. He finished with a goal and 2 assists. And Mark Scheifele had a goal and 2 assists. Josh Morris, he picked up 2 assists. So how important are these guys going to be for, keeping obviously we talk about Winnipeg and how they have a lot of depth, and that's great because this team really didn't go out during the offseason or the trade deadline and add any big name pieces, but they did add some depth to kind of bolster the big names they already have. So how much, we hear it all the time. It's like you need your top guys to be your top guys, but how important is that going to be for Winnipeg in this series?
Yeah, Kyle Connor, who led the Jets in scoring, but was a healthy scratch in the game against Canada at the Four Nations. With the absences due to injury in the Jets lineup, it puts even more pressure on Scheifele and Connor to produce. They got to go out of, as you said, Anderson Dolan. They got to go out of Alex Iafallo. They got the empty netter out of Adam Lowry. But really, it's going to center all around Scheifele and Connor. And if St. Louis can shut them down, easier said than done, then they have a chance. But if they produce like they did tonight, 6 points between the two of them, then it's going to be really tough for St. Louis unless Binnington is just unconscious.
Well, you mentioned Alex Iafallo got a goal. Mark Scheifele actually became the Jets' all-time playoff scoring leader with an assist on that goal, and it was the tying goal in the third. So how important do you think Scheifele in particular has been to keeping this franchise competitive, not just this season or in this series, just over his career? How important has he been to keeping this franchise competitive in Winnipeg?
The biggest moment in Winnipeg Jets history may have been when they got Scheifele and Hellebuck to take the extensions that they eventually took. Had they not done that, I would start to question whether that franchise was going to stay in Winnipeg long term. And there's still questions about that. I think the success that they have, or lack of success if they go out early, could have a big effect on their future in Manitoba. But Scheifele is an extremely important player, and he, I believe it was Blake Wheeler who he beat, who he surpassed with the 3 points today. So, he's an excellent player. He should have been on the Four Nations team. He should be on Canada's team at the Olympics next February. He's one of the best centers in the league, and a very important player to their postseason hopes.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And anyone who's tuning in, welcome. We are talking, of course, about the Winnipeg Jets defeating the St. Louis Blues 5-3 in Game 1 of their series. Of course, we welcome wherever you're watching, YouTube, X, wherever you might be finding us tonight. We welcome questions, comments, any of that. We are happy to do our best to answer them for you here on air. In the meantime, Michael, looking at, the Jets coming into this series during the regular season, obviously they were the best team in the NHL, bar none, for the regular season. However, their record during the regular season when trailing heading into the third period was 2-16-1. So the odds were certainly not in their favor heading into the third period of this game. They were down 3-2. I mentioned Iafallo's game-tying goal in the third there. How much do you think, just kind of looking at regular season records and trends and things like that, how much of that do you feel like really matters when it comes to the playoffs? It just feels like the playoffs are such a different animal, and it just feels like it's a completely clean slate. Do you agree with that, or what do you think about that?
Throw the stats completely out. They're absolutely meaningless. You could say they weren't behind that much in the third period because they won the President's Trophy, and when they when they fell behind. It was sort of unusual for them, and you can make a case for that. But yeah, I don't put a lot of stock into regular season stats as opposed to postseason stats. The Bruins, and I just remember this because the Bruins won the Stanley Cup that year in 2011. They had a pretty good power play during the regular season. They traded for Thomas Caberlet, who was a very good point man on a power play with Toronto for years. Their power play went like 1 for 31 in the postseason. I mean, it was terrible. So really, I don't think there's any correlation between stuff that happens in the regular season and in the playoffs. Now, they bucked the trend. Tonight they were down 3-2 going into the third period with, I believe, 10 minutes left to go. They tie the game. They win it with a few minutes left. And then they add the empty netter, and then all bedlam ensued, which was highly entertaining as well. But yeah, I mean, they don't want to make a practice of falling behind in the third period, but they were able to buck that trend.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, nothing like the playoffs, nothing like the physicality and the emotion that you see in the playoffs. We certainly saw that with the all-out brawl tonight, like you said, at the end of the third period. Um, here's an interesting one. A stat, yes, but not from the regular season. It's just a stat from tonight. These two teams combined for 3 power play goals through the first 2 periods. And obviously Winnipeg had the best power play in the league for most of the year. I believe St. Louis was near the bottom for the penalty kill. I think they were tied at 27th or somewhere around there. So looking at, those numbers, it was actually St. Louis that had the 2 power play goals and Winnipeg had 1. But knowing how much Winnipeg can dominate the special teams games, what do you think? How much of this series do you think is going to be decided on special teams versus 5-on-5? And who would you give the edge to if it is decided on special teams?
The best penalty killer is the goaltender. Winnipeg had the number 1 power play in the league, but Nikolai Ehlers and Gabriel Velarde were very important pieces to that power play, and they did not play in game 1. So that takes a couple legs out of the chair. You need your full complement to have that power play that was so successful during the regular season to be successful during the postseason. So I think Winnipeg, especially with those 2 players out, needs the power play even without them to produce. St. Louis to pull the upset. And, they have great offensive players, Jordan Kyrou, they have Robert Thomas, Shen is not a slouch. They need their special teams to play at a high level for them to have any chance. But I think, especially without Ehlers and Velarde, Winnipeg, it's more important for them to get production out of their power play.
Well, speaking of missing Ehlers and Velarde, how do you feel like Winnipeg kind of handled the absences of both of those guys? We talked about guys coming in like Jared Anderson-Dolan. We saw some guys in more elevated roles like Brandon Tanev playing higher up the lineup. And how do you think that they've been able to sort of weather this storm? And obviously they came away with the win tonight, but will it be sustainable, and how long will they be able to keep it going?
Well, the expectation was that nobody expected Ehlers to play at least in the first couple games, and probably not even in the whole series. But Velarde's been out for about a month and had been skating, and it sounded like he was going to be in the lineup, and then all of a sudden, late today, right before the game, it was announced he wasn't going to play. He's a key component for this Jets team. You're going to have, Adam Lowry playing in a more offensive role. You're going to have Nemestikov playing higher in the lineup, Cole Perfetti. I mean, when all these players get elevated, you're taking them out of the role that they've been successful at. So now maybe they held Velarde out, figured They can get a couple extra days of healing time and, not expose him to the physicality of the Blues in game one. Maybe they hold them out for game two since they're playing with house money now. Now that they're up 1-0, they probably hope that they could win game two at home with the last line change and then go to St. Louis, and then maybe they keep holding him out until they actually need him. But I think eventually they're going to need him. And for them to have a good chance at getting through the Central Division and to get to the Western Conference Final, I don't think, and I think I've said this on the wraparound, I don't think Winnipeg can get by Dallas or Colorado without Ehlers and without Velarde.
Well, those, as you said, two key components for this Jets team who are missing. But the Blues are also without one of their key players in Dylan Holloway. So I'll ask you the same question about them. How do you think they have handled not having Holloway in game one? We still don't have an exact timeline for him. He's still considered week to week as well. But he's a big piece for them as well. How do you think that they've handled it thus far? How much do you think, does he have the same kind of impact on that team the way that Velarde and Ehlers do for Winnipeg?
Not as much of an impact on the Blues as the two absences on Winnipeg, but Holloway had, I believe, 26 goals. He had a really fantastic season, and it was really sad that he got injured when he did. Jimmy Snuggerud played 16 minutes. I would think that he sort of fit into that Holloway role, and he didn't play badly. I mean, this is a guy who's played less than 10 NHL games. So, I think he stepped into that role fairly well. But, again, the Blues had Kyrou and had Robert Thomas, and they both produced in this game. They're probably going to need them to produce more, or they're probably going to need Braden Shen, who was -2 on the evening, to play a lot better.
Well, I guess on that note, I will ask you, and again, for anyone who is just joining us, this is the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. Emma Lingen and Michael Agello here talking about game one of Winnipeg Jets versus St. Louis Blues. Jets took game one. We are talking about it now. We already talked about this a little bit. You just alluded to it. Anyone that you haven't mentioned yet, we got a question here about which player do you think needs the biggest bounce back in game two for either team?
For the Blues, I would say it's Cam Fowler. He was -3 on the night. He had an assist, but he was -3 in a little over 21 minutes. Cam Fowler has a lot of playoff experience, playing almost all of his career with the Anaheim Ducks. With Colton Parayko, he was injured. He came back. I'm not sure how close to 100% he is. I think the importance of Fowler playing at a higher level, and probably Justin Falk playing at a higher level, but mostly Fowler with the -3. I mean, that's a stark statistic.
Yeah. What about, we talked about the goaltenders a little bit, but what about, we mentioned it already, but Binnington versus Hellebuck in game one, both of them, I think Binnington finished the game with an .840 save percentage. Hellebuck was .824. So those numbers, not ideal for either one of those guys. And so how much do you think that these guys are going to be feeling the pressure to really come back in game two?
You would shake your head after thinking that these goalies were two of the best in the league based on the way that they played tonight. Now, we talked about the nervousness with Hellebuck. We know Binnington has come up big at the Four Nations in 2019, winning a Stanley Cup. So, I think their importance to both clubs is interwoven. They really need Binnington to play at a high level to be able to win or even stay close in the series. And if Hellebuck he wasn't bad tonight, but he just wasn't Hellebuck. if he continues to play like this, then I think St. Louis has a chance to climb back into the series.
All right. Well, again, we are talking Jets Blues. Game 1 obviously goes to the Jets. Checking in right now on game 1 of Avalanche versus Stars. It is still 0-0. Puck just dropped for the second period in that one. We'll keep you updated on that as well. So now I have a question. This is, I think, an interesting one. Who would you rather face in the second round? Would you rather face Colorado or Dallas?
I would rather face Dallas with the injuries that they have right now, especially the news that Jason Robertson will be out week to week. They got Tyler Seguin back late in the regular season. He played against Nashville in the season finale, but then they lose Robertson. And the information that Peter DeBoer came out with and said week to week, that had to be not exactly welcome news. Now, on the optimistic side, Miro Heiskanen skated. We don't know how close he is, and that could be mind games. They could be playing that with Jared Bednar to, put a scare in the Avalanche. But the Avalanche are fully healthy right now and may have Gabriel Landeskog in their lineup for game 2, which I think will be an emotional. It'll just be, I can just imagine what the crowd in Colorado will be like when he steps on the ice. So if I'm Winnipeg or if I'm St. Louis, I think I would rather face a dinged up Dallas Stars team without Robertson and with a not 100% Heiskanen.
Well, you mentioned Heiskanen. He did skate with the team. If he is eligible to return at some point during this first round series against Colorado, how much do you think he alone will dictate the outcome of this series for Dallas?
It depends on how long it takes for him to get back into the series. If it's game 5, 6, 7, something like that, and it's a tight series, which we're all expecting it to be, then his entry into the lineup could make a big difference. Remember, he's, sometimes point man on the power play. If Thomas Harley isn't doing that job, he eats minutes, but we don't know how capable he will be in terms of playing 20, 25, 27, 28 minutes a night. Just getting him back in the lineup could be just as much of a positive for the Stars because he's been out for such a long time as Landeskog coming back after 3 years. But I really think Dallas needs Heiskanen to come back to have any chance of advancing in the playoffs.
Well, I want to wrap up today. Again, Dallas, Colorado, still 0-0 in the second period of that game right now. I want to wrap up today, though, talking about, I have a question for you about the other Western Conference series, so Edmonton and LA, because that series starts on Monday. Chris Knobloch said that it is likely that Trent Frederick, Evander Kane, and Jake Wallman will all be back at some point in the Oilers' first round series versus LA. So, does this news change your opinion about how you think the series will play out? And how do you think the series will play out?
Not at all, because we all expected Kane to be back. I know Frederick was injured when he was traded from Boston to Edmonton. Wallman got hurt after the trade from San Jose. But anybody who's basing their prediction of that series on the health of any of those three players, when McDavid is just coming back from injury and Draisaitl is clearly not going to be at 100%, I don't know what game they're watching, because though as goes McDavid and Draisaitl, thus goes the Edmonton Oilers. They need Skinner to play better than he's played over the last few months, but I think it's favorable for Los Angeles more than any time than it has been over the last 3 years. I didn't think they had a chance last year. This year, Darcy Kemper has played wonderfully. They've had a fantastic record at home, and they got home ice advantage. Now they have to take advantage of that home ice advantage. If they do that, then they'll win. And I predicted the Kings to win that series, so we'll see.
We will see indeed. All right. We are going to wrap up our conversation here about Jets Blues. Game 1, again, goes to the Jets. Colorado and Dallas still waiting to see what happens there in game 1. Want to remind everyone to tune in tomorrow because we will be live here every night at the Hockey News during the playoffs. Tomorrow, we're going to be focusing on the game of the night, which is Ottawa against Toronto. Going to be a big one for sure. Of course, we've also got New Jersey and Carolina kicking off tomorrow as well. So you want to make sure you don't miss any of the action. We will be covering it all right here at the Hockey News. Once again, want to thank anyone and everyone who has tuned in to watch us tonight. Be sure to tell your friends and come back and keep sending us your questions because we love answering those. Again, thank you to Stix.com for sponsoring us. Thank you again to Michael Agello for joining me tonight. And I am Emma Lingen, and that's it. And we will see you guys tomorrow.